Greetings all and welcome. Welcome students, faculty, thesis advisors, thesis reviewers, friends and family. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Johns Hopkins Master of Arts in Science Writing Program's fall semester thesis reading. My name is Melissa Hendricks, and I'm the Associate Director of the Hopkins Science Writing Program. Students in this program spend from 18 months to 5 years earning their master's degree in science writing, taking courses in areas such as science journalism, essay writing, and high-level grammar and syntax. Their graduate studies culminate in a thesis course during which they revise and polish a portfolio of their writing, striving for excellence and for work that is worthy of publication. And indeed, many thesis students do publish their work, including, and here's my shameless plug, publishing in our own magazine, The Science Writer. In fact, one of the authors you'll hear from tonight has an article in the new issue of The Science Writer, which was just published this past week. And you can check it out at thesciencewriter.org. The theme of the magazine's latest issue happens to be resilience. Now there's a timely topic. We need resilience to get through the tough times. And let's face it, we've been knee-deep in you-know-what for quite a while. We've wrestled with pandemics that we brought upon ourselves. Our politics have grown poisonous. The greenhouse gases from our ravenous consumption are suffocating the planet, and so on. Homo sapiens, what is wrong with us? Yet, recently, I have noticed in the periphery of my thinking little glimmers of hope. And some of these glimmers come from our students. Our students write about, yes, the difficulties we've had with the pandemic and with global warming and so on. But also, they're writing about the bravery and ingenuity of the human mind in grappling with those challenges. And they write about how the enterprise of science is coming to our rescue. I can tell you honestly that having had a chance to read what they wrote has given me hope in a period of darkness. And we've all worked together as a community to try to make sense of the world that we live in. These writers have turned gloom to hope, not just with facts, but with empathy, imagination, and creativity. And on this evening, we're here to celebrate how they did it. Tonight, you'll hear from writers who help us understand fundamental mysteries of the body and the mind, of climate change and space, of life and decomposition. And you'll hear stories of our social ills told through the eyes of people who are experiencing them, and stories that capture the wonder of how nature works. But we're not just looking backward at what these students have accomplished. We're also looking forward. This is just a beginning. You have climbed a mountain. Well done, students. Look ahead, gear up. There are a lot more mountains out there. And before we begin our reading, I just want to mention a few things. You'll see in the chat box a program for tonight's event. We will hear from several readers, and then we will pause for a 5-minute intermission, and then we will hear from the remaining readers. This session is being recorded, and so just sit back and relax and enjoy the evening. And it is my pleasure now to introduce my colleague, Sam Apple, who is the faculty program coordinator and a faculty member for this program.
Thank you, Melissa. I just wanted to very quickly congratulate all the students. Had the really great pleasure of working with almost everybody who's reading tonight. And it's just been a great privilege to watch them grow as writers during their time in the program, and grow as people and thinkers and scientific thinkers. It's really been wonderful, and I've had the special pleasure of working as an advisor on a few of these theses. And every one of the students that I've worked with and everyone in this Zoom chat tonight, everyone you'll hear from has worked incredibly hard, and I think you'll see how far they've come and how accomplished they are when you hear what they read tonight. So congrats again to all. And I want to now introduce Sue Eisenfeld, a faculty lecturer in the program, who has played a very instrumental role in shaping our thesis courses and working with all these students. So much of what you hear tonight is a credit to Sue's hard work. And I will hand it off.
Thank you, Sam. Well, again, I too would like to say congratulations to all of you for reaching this point. I have been delighted and honored to work with this entire cohort of students since everyone is in my thesis class this semester. And I have been so honored to have read 5 of your theses as advisor, several more of your complete theses as a reviewer. I have read all of your writing life and career plans and all of your pitches to magazines, as you all know. And by reading all of this, what this has really shown me is that your ideas and your writing is just so impressive. I've been seriously wowed, seriously moved, and I'm just really excited for all that you are bringing to the field of science writing. You make our program look good, and I am just looking forward to bragging that you all were my students when you're a household name. And I'm really excited, seriously, for the difference that you're going to make with your words. I also wanted to just say congratulations. Well, what I wanted to say was that you should congratulate yourselves as well, because you have really invested in yourselves. You've invested your time, your money in getting this degree for yourself. I wanted to also congratulate and thank your family and your friends and your partners and your kids for supporting you as you went through this journey as well. And so with no further ado, I would like to kick off the reading by introducing our first reader, Rachel Lenz.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate you being here. My piece is called Stars. It is an essay vignette from a larger collection called Lucky Charms, where each piece is loosely based on a colorful marshmallow from the popular cereal, but also represents how I've used each charm to defend against depression, anxiety, and other pitfalls life has thrown at me. So this is called Stars again. Race ya. An immediate stampede of hormones and feet hit the asphalt, glittering with dew. The electric buzz of street lamps overhead is quickly engulfed by the crackling of our laughter, a pollutant in quiet suburbia. As we wend our way and burp and shove and jump and spit and toward the park, the teachers march forward, telescopes slung heavy on shoulders, determined to carry out their task of illuminating young minds to the heavens, come hell, high water, or those damnable hormones. Rachel, it's your turn, my science teacher waves me in. Still slightly sticky from the race, I wipe my hands on my too tight in the waist, too loose in the legs flare jeans. Seeing my jeans makes me uncomfortable, so I tug on my sweatshirt, making sure my stomach fat, my muffin top, as I've recently learned, is well hidden from view. Now I'm paranoid somebody saw my act of self-consciousness. I look behind me to check and, don't you want to see Saturn? Be quick now, the clouds are rolling in. I snap back to attention, nod my agreement. Yes, of course I want to see Saturn. I step forward, bend over at the waist, and tug my sweatshirt again, making 100% sure it's covering my fat. Then I close my left eye and press my right against the eyepiece. My right hand rests lightly on the scope stand, holding me steady. I see something, but it's fuzzy, I say. My teacher takes my left hand, still hovering by my waistline, and guides it slowly up the scope's barrel, setting it gently on a hard plastic knob. Twist until it's focused just right, she says, but don't take too long. Other kids still need to go. I turn the knob experimentally. My fingers move in measurements they've never known before. 700, 800, 900 million miles. A dusty orange blob half a solar system away beams into sharp relief. Saturn, a gas giant 700 times the volume of Earth, reduced to millimeters just for me, floats in front of my eyeball this moment. How bright it is, how quiet. An occasion such as this calls for fanfare, but there is nothing. Nothing but the raucous din of my classmates behind me. I notice the shadow the ball of the planet casts on its rings, but there is no softness to the shadow's edge like I'm used to seeing here on Earth. No diffusion of light through the atmosphere. It cuts, no bites itself. What's that painting? Saturn devouring his sun? My breath catches. I'm seeing the sun cast Saturn's shadow on itself, I think, in real time, in outer space. And any thoughts of jeans or muffin tops or boys or girls are farther away than the farthest star in the galaxy. Okay, and up next is Kennedy Lamb, who will be reading Memories from a Blind Mind's Eye.
Thank you so much, Rachel. That was lovely. As Rachel said, I'll be reading an excerpt from an essay entitled Memories from a Blind Mind's Eye. Ian Feldman knew he lived a memorable childhood. The problem is, he can't remember it. He knows that he lived in 5 different countries from ages 3 to 18. He knew he felt different than the other kids at the 5 different international schools he attended. But he can't remember the names of his friends at school, nor the names of the streets where he lived. There is no memory of when he got lost in a rainforest at 8 years old in El Salvador, nor of the time when he gashed his heel running barefoot on the littered back roads of Tanzania. Ian moved from country to country with his parents, who worked in the US State Department and were consistently stationed overseas. But the only thing he can unequivocally remember is that something felt off in his brain. I met Ian when we were seniors at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or UMBC. We worked together on a photography project in East Baltimore. It was a great professional pairing, one that soon blossomed into a friendship and then a relationship of nearly 3 years. He became a professional photographer at just 17. He started his freelance business, Baltimore Camera Vision, at 19. Photography meant everything to him, and I would soon find out why. We started dating during a pivotal time in his life, one where he finally discovered what felt off in his brain. We were both 21 years old, a pivotal time in any person's life, let alone when trying to dissect the mysteries of your own brain. About 6 months into our relationship, I awoke early one morning to see him hunched over his laptop. I approached him and lightly brushed his shoulder to alert him of my presence. He looked up. "Kennedy," he said, "I know what's wrong with me. I have aphantasia." Aphantasia is defined as the inability to visualize in your head or your mind's eye. Visualization in the mind's eye is on a spectrum. Some see images as clearly as if the object were right in front of them, while others, like those with aphantasia, lack this visual system entirely. The polar opposite of aphantasia, referred to as hyperphantasia, is the ability to describe pictures in the mind's eye so vividly, it can be hard to tell whether an image was perceived or imagined. Anecdotally, aphants report struggling with autobiographical memory. In fact, that's how many aphants realize that they're living with aphantasia, including Ian. As researchers are now trying to understand, It's possible that recalling our own experiences, known as episodic memory, depends more on the mind's eye than originally thought. The Vividness of Visual Imagery quiz, developed in 1973 by British psychologist David Marks, is often the litmus test for diagnosing aphantasia. The quiz takes participants through a series of prompts brimming with imagery eliciting descriptions. At the end, they're asked to rate how vividly they could picture the scenarios in their mind. Ian took the test and scored a 1, which meant he saw no image at all. I took the quiz for myself and found out that my mind's eye is quite the opposite. I scored a 4 out of 5, meaning I was on the complete opposite end of the visual spectrum. Images play like movies in my mind, effortlessly transitioning from one to another. I can close my eyes and picture every detail of Ian's face. Ian can't do the same for me. Through various studies, British cognitive neuroscientist Adam Zeman and his colleagues concluded that aphantasia may be caused by a lack of communication and connectivity between regions of the brain responsible for perceiving external stimuli, or the occipital lobe, and converting it to memories, the hippocampus. This may be, at least in part, why Ian and others with aphantasia struggle to recall memories. If the occipital lobe and the hippocampus can't communicate, then creating visual memories is virtually impossible. And then it dawned on me. Ian, I asked one day, why did you decide to become a photographer? He paused for a moment. Some people say a picture is worth 1,000 words, he said. For me, a picture is my livelihood. It's my way to connect with what I've lost. Thank you, everyone. It is my pleasure now to introduce Mary Pfeiffer-Silva.
Thank you, Kennedy. That was wonderful. I'll now be reading an excerpt from my piece entitled Burnout, How It's Destroying the Bodies, Minds, and Lives of Our Teachers. We all expected this year to be at least easier than last year, says Amy, an elementary school guidance counselor in her 6th year on the job in a suburban district of Central Ohio. Not normal, but a step in that direction. They were wrong. It's really common to hear teachers say, I'm drowning, or I feel like I'm going to lose it, says Amy. I don't think most of us expected to be where we are and also feel this burnout. The term burnout was first described by clinical psychologist Herbert Freudenberger in 1974. After experiencing symptoms himself, Freudenberger defined burnout as becoming exhausted by making excessive demands on energy, strength, and resources. It's believed that Freudenberger coined the term after watching drug addicts, his clients, hold their cigarettes until they burnt out. Similar to the old adage, burning the candle at both ends, or working too hard for too long until you quite literally burn out. Nearly 50 years later, smack dab in the middle of a pandemic, burnout seems to be more prevalent than ever. But it's more than just working too hard. It's a state of imbalance when the demands, deadlines, and expectations of a job outweigh the rewards, recognition, and ability to relax. Research has shown, if left unchecked, burnout can have a significant impact on the body and the brain. Eventually, it seeps beyond work into all aspects of life. The alarm pierces the bedroom silence. Maggie hits the snooze button for the 3rd time. Sleep had not come easily the night before. Anxious thoughts ricocheted up and down the curves of her cerebrum, prohibiting the slow brainwaves of slumber. She cocoons into the fortress of her bedsheets, at least for a few minutes more. Maggie tackles the 30-minute commute to her job as an elementary school intervention specialist, then sits for a minute in her parked blue Kia Sportage. On the playground, childless swings quiver in the morning breeze. The pale red and yellow brick school, dotted by translucent black pane windows, glares at her as if to say, "You're late." Her to-do list has grown longer with each passing minute as she preps herself for another day of too few staff and too much stress. Stress and frustration from the political climate of our education system and the dangers of the virus itself have caused many teachers to contemplate other career options. A survey by Mission Square Research Institute found that 38% of K through 12 teachers have considered quitting their jobs during the pandemic. Some have already left the field or have retired early, which has added to the already dire teacher shortage. Los Angeles Unified, California's largest school district, reported 500 teacher vacancies at the beginning of the 2021-2022 school year, a five-fold increase from past years. There are not enough substitutes, bus drivers, instructional paraprofessionals, or janitors either. Across the country, some students with disabilities go without the legally required services. Secretaries direct school traffic, principals clean bathrooms. Inside Maggie's classroom, a large white paper schedule broken down into 5-minute intervals hangs on the blue-gray wall behind her desk. Post-it notes, fuchsia, chartreuse, and cyan dictate the locations and tasks of each of her 9 special needs students throughout the school day. Maggie ruminates on how she will manage with 3 paras because, ideally, she needs 4 or 5. Maggie doesn't have enough eyes to watch or hands to engage each student. And when they aren't fully engaged, danger lurks. Potential catastrophes haunt her. Students sticking inedible items in their mouth, throwing projectiles, physically lashing out at other students or staff. But the line between worst case scenario and reality has started to blur fast. Just yesterday, a child escaped from her classroom and nearly made it to an exterior door. All right, thank you. And up next, we will hear from Annalise Kenny.
Thank you, Mary. Amazing work. I'll be reading from Turning Hands, Turning Seas, Balancing Change and Preservation in Kauai's Limahuli Valley. In this essay, I explore themes of impermanence while traveling the island of Kauai. Much of the piece takes place in Limahuli Garden and Preserve, a botanical garden that protects archaeological sites and native flora in one of the most biodiverse valleys in the Hawaiian Islands. Spritz, scrub, spritz, scrub. A solemn modern ritual greets visitors of Limahuli Garden and Preserve in Northwest Kauai. Before my husband and I step onto the grassy path leading through the Limahuli Valley, the garden staff requests that we clean our shoes. This preventative measure defends against a fungal disease spreading among the island's native ohia trees, a myrtle species that is the most abundant native tree in Hawaii. Having killed hundreds of thousands of trees on the Big Island of Hawaii over less than a decade, the disease was detected in Kauai in 2018. There's no cure, but cleaning shoes before entering and after leaving forests can prevent the disease's spread. Like tourists who came before us, we sit on a wooden bench by the visitor's center and reach for stiff bristled brushes. We spritz one another's shoes with a spray bottle of rubbing alcohol solution and scrub at our soles, imagining invisible spores. Ahead, stone-walled terraces rise through the 1,000-acre valley toward thickly forested mountainsides. The stature and age of the volcano-born mountains sheltering the valley make me feel insignificant, but our ritual disinfection indicates otherwise. Without taking preventative action, my first footsteps into the preserve could bring devastation to the valley's ohia trees. This weighty realization in mind, I'm slow to move toward the garden path. Kauai and its multitude of ecosystems are no strangers to new arrivals, especially those brought by humans. A place like this one, where a helix of natural and human forces has twined for 1,000 years, forces its visitors to consider the timeline of a landscape and to reckon with the future. A place like this one sends my mind churning like the ocean at the foot of this valley. Should we as humans attempt to preserve or adjust to change? It's an impossible question, and one that the people of the Limahuli Valley have wrestled with for centuries. Even today, there's no better place to contemplate our complicated role in this world than on an island anchored in the swiftly changing sea. On our 3rd day in Kauai, the winter swell arrived. Bemoaned by calm water-loving snorkelers, but beloved by surfers, this sea change transforms the waters of the island's north shore to oceanic chaos. When we'd booked a boat tour around the Kauai coast a month before the trip, my husband and I had not realized we would be catching a first-hand look at the roughening waters. Departing from a harbor on the south of the island, the boat tours afford tourists views of the Nepali coast, the iconic 17-mile cliff range that guards Kauai's northern shoreline. Our tour departed on calm southern waters that morning with Captain Manu at the helm, with one hand on the wheel of the power catamaran and the other pointing out old sugar factories and his surfing spots. Manu spoke in a surfer's lackadaisical drawl. But when we jetted around a peninsula and hit the open ocean, his demeanor changed to match the conditions. Fighting the smacking, rolling sea, he put both hands on the wheel and turned the catamaran into the waves. As the boat crested each steep wave and thudded down the backside, water sprayed against Manu's windshield. We hunkered in our seats, showered with bursts of salt water as the boat powered through the chop. At last, we reached the Nepali scenery of the brochures. Scrub-covered cliffs, called pali, thrust like green flames from the ocean's surface. On calmer days, Manu takes visitors into sea caves that the ocean has carved into the cliffs. We drifted at the entrance of a cave and watched the waves froth in its mouth. As we pulled away from the base of the cliffs, Manu turned to look at us. With the wave noise drowning our friendly chatter, we passengers had fallen silent, awed by our surroundings. You know, he said, casting his voice large over the booming waves, someday these cliffs won't exist. The waves wear away at the rock, on and on, beating it down. Someday this island won't exist. Sentiment flipped in my stomach as if we were cresting the tallest wave yet. I traced my eyes from sloshing ocean to the pointed tips of the pali, imagining them underwater. And now I would like to introduce Jade Lynn, reading from Illuminating the Deep Sea's Living Lights.
Hello, I'll be reading a shortened version of my piece, Illuminating the Deep Sea's Living Lights. This is a book review of Dr. Edith Witter's memoir, Below the Edge of Darkness. It wasn't until she reached a depth of 1,831 feet below the ocean's surface that Edith Witter started to panic. 2 days before, she had emerged from her 800-foot test dive in the WASP deep sea diving suit, entranced by a display of glowing bioluminescent organisms like a three-dimensional version of Van Gogh's Starry Night. But as Witter reached the bottom, she suddenly became aware of her situation. She had spent 80 minutes descending to the seafloor, and above her lay over 100,000 pounds of water. Should the suit spring a leak, the water would jet in at a pressure high enough to pierce flesh. Just as fear started to overwhelm her, Witter's gaze latched onto the rainbow shimmer of a jellyfish swimming by, and she directed her full attention into observing this creature's delicate beauty. It quickly disappeared from view, but that brief moment of focus was enough to wrench Witter from the brink of panic and let her continue the mission. There are a few harrowing moments like this in Witter's new science-filled memoir, Below the Edge of Darkness. Witter, a pioneering marine biologist, takes readers on a riveting adventure into the depths of the ocean, where life is largely governed by the presence or absence of light. Witter describes fantastical sea creatures: shrimp spewing luminescent proteins, fish fitted with flashlights, octopuses with lights for suckers, all to inspire and inform the next generation of ocean explorers. Witter explains that in the open ocean, many animals rely on darkness to evade predators. During the day, these animals hang out below the edge of darkness, where very little sunlight penetrates through the water. Only when the sun sets, when the intensity of light at the surface dims, do these animals migrate up through the water column to feed. They evolved to use bioluminescence to deal with the unique challenges of finding food, avoiding being eaten, and communicating with others, all while in the dark. The natural light of bioluminescence is produced via chemical reaction when a luciferase enzyme catalyzes a luciferin protein. The vast majority of life in the ocean is bioluminescent, but Witter points out most people are oblivious to this fact. Although marine bioluminescence can be seen with the dark-adjusted human eye, the most accessible sources in coastal surface waters are drowned out by human lights. At times, Witter goes overboard, waxing poetic about marine life. Her flowery language, however, is understandable, considering the challenges of trying to explain in words such wonders and absurdities that should really be seen with one's own eyes. Yet, Witter succeeds in showing off her passion and expertise as a scientist who spent decades studying marine bioluminescence. Her explanations are accessible and intuitive, her scenes vivid and exciting. The book arrives at a time when investments in our oceans have never been more critical. Assaulted on all sides by climate change, overfishing, pollution, and an endless parade of other anthropogenic impacts, the oceans are in dire need of protection. Witter argues that refocusing on exploration will help people move past the immobilization of eco-anxiety. Instead of being overwhelmed by the ocean of problems we have yet to solve, we should direct our energy to understanding the marvelous eccentricities of our ocean planet. While Witter's hunger for discovery has allowed her to make pioneering advances in the field of deep-sea ecology, she believes there are still plenty of mysteries for future explorers to unravel. An awful lot of what we think we know about bioluminescence in the ocean is just guesswork, Witter reveals. And yet, what a glorious puzzle to try to solve. Thank you. And now we'll hear from Miao Wu, reading from her piece, Everything Will Be Okay.
Thank you, Jay. That was lovely. Hi, everyone. I'll be reading an excerpt from my piece titled Everything Will Be Okay. This piece is a part of a memoir I'm working on, and it is a tribute to the brave men, women, and children of Burma through my eyes as a flow cytometrist. Everything will be okay. Mandalay, Burma, spring 2021. She died unavenged. A sniper bullet shot from an unknown point pierced through her porcelain skin, cracking her skull and lodging itself in the fleshy innards of her brain. It took just a few seconds as she sighed and fell in a thump on the sizzling Mandalay Road. Scores of protesters dispersed as score more bullets were fired into the crowd. Her friends dragged her lifeless body away as they took shelter from the raining bullets. Only 19, she was somewhat of a teenage sensation in these parts of Burma and went by the stage name Angel. On that fateful day, she wore a black, oversized t-shirt that read, "Everything will be okay." It was now soaked with her own blood and sweat. And perhaps everything will be okay in time, but right then, everything seemed far from okay. Word on the street was that the military aimed to clear any kind of civil disobedience within 7 days. Not one living body was to be seen on the streets. Martial law had been announced. In the ensuing months, bodies of thousands of peaceful protesters flooded the streets. Most of these deaths were head wounds like Angel's. The Burmese generals had consulted a seer who advised them to aim for the heads of protesters for a successful coup. But the Burmese people are a stubborn lot. After almost a decade of life under a democratically elected government prior to this coup, they were drunk on freedom. Having tasted freedom, they simply refused to let go. Martial law or not, they were going to keep marching. Seer or no seer, bullets in the brain did not faze them. Every day, unrehearsed, people from all walks of life spilled out onto the streets, singing catchy slogans about the downfall of the military. At a time when the rest of the world was locked down under pandemic measures, the Burmese cared little for COVID. They felt that military rule was more infectious than the coronavirus. Nutley, New Jersey, fall 2021. After running quality control beats on the symphony, I finally managed to coax the cytometer to work. I ran tuberculosis infected cells in the machine to track the changing protein expressions at different disease stages. Like a cell getting infected with TB, Burma has been infected with military rule. TB has been an age-old scourge and an age-old enigma, just like military rule. Like the cell reacting innately to the disease, the Burmese people also instinctively responded to military rule by expressing the desire for democracy. With TB disease outcomes, sometimes the cells win and other times the disease win. But the problem with TB is that it has a cunning way of hiding in bigger immune cells like macrophages and staying dormant for years before resurfacing with terror again. So even though it seems like the cells have won, they really haven't. The same is true with Burma's wrestle with military rule. It seemed as though the country was finally free from the rot of military rule back in 2010 and resumed democracy, but we now know it was just a facade. The hands of military rule had been hidden for some time in a bigger neighboring country, and when encouraged, resurfaced like TB with spiteful terror. As a flow cytometrist, most of what I do is observe, track, and analyze the flow and rhythm of cellular protein expression patterns during TB with the goal and hope of finding a cure. More often than not, I also find myself flowing in the river of life. As I observe the flow of events in Burma and find ways to raise awareness for the Burmese dream and pursuit of democracy, I can only hope that one day my people will find a place in the fairer future of the free world, and that everything will be okay once again. Thank you, everyone. It is now my pleasure to introduce Catherine McCullough.
Thank you. So I'll be reading a piece titled The COVID Tango, which is a flash nonfiction piece that's more of a commentary about our response to the pandemic or lack thereof. And it also gives a nod to the emergence of long COVID as a mass disabling event. Act 1. Step forward, step back. Repeat again. Step forward, step back, step back. We watch in awe as the COVID tango evolves into a repetitive entanglement in which there is no makeup, no costumes, no fancy hair, just sweatpants, double masks, and no hugs. Some take immature steps forward as they wear masks and embrace, or wear no masks and partially distance. Some take step back when they do not wear masks or do not distance or do not wash hands. Motion ceases as dancers question their next steps. Uncertainty blankets the floor and confusion engulfs the troupe. A stagnant formation devolves into disarray as dancers scramble for firm footing. Some pivot, some spin, some leap, some retreat. Bonds break as partners separate. Dancers abandon the safety of rehearsed choreography. The choreographer shouts instructions. No one listens, no one hears. Chaos ensues. Pandemonium mounts. Dancers stumble. Masks slip. The troupe brawls. Step forward, step back, step back. Repeat again. Step back, step back, step back. It is a horrific, botched performance. But we cannot look away. We are frozen in time and place. COVID time, a pandemic place. We are not sure how long we have been here, nor how long we will remain. We are confident in nothing, not even time. In this endless age, we wait. We look ahead. We see nothing but a fragmented frenzy. We inhale and hope for a better second act. We do not exhale. Act 2. Month to month, the dancers slow their frantic chaos. They stoop to massage their overworked muscles, fingers digging into the lean flesh of their limbs. They begin to search for the partner they shoved aside in the first wave of chaos, a wave that touched the most innate of all human instincts and caused each dancer to act with animal impulse. Some fled, others crouched, some yelled, others observed. A cascade of dancers, separated by acts of self-preservation and commitments to survival. But no matter which polarity they occupied, nor from what intimate place their primal behaviors originated, they are here now, individual but together, gasping, trying to plant their feet firmly on the ground as they gaze across the stage at the aftermath of their dance, the carelessness of their flailing arms and thrashing legs, the damage of their individual and collective choice to ignore the structure of choreography, to ignore the boundaries of premeditated steps, to ignore the safety and trust that exists when your troupe moves as one. Standing in the aftermath, they assess the bodies. They assess the limbs and torso attached to their own feet first, and then begin to notice those around them still gasping for breath, those who are unable to recover from the effects of a long COVID tango, dancers who may never dance again, but who are still members of the troupe. A troupe that now gathers as a collection of battered and wounded dancers who still search for the root of their demise, who are still in disbelief after encountering their own fragility, who are still unsure of how they got here, who continue to search for answers. A troupe that holds steadfast to their individual and collective identities as dancers, a troupe that persists in existence despite their abandonment of core ideals and values, an abandonment that served to preserve the individual instead of the collective, a collective that now pauses, gasping, to take stock of what is in front of them. A mirror reflects the truth as the divide between audience and dancer dissolves, and we recognize the dance we witnessed was ours all along. Thank you. Now we have the pleasure of hearing from Molly McCrory.
Thank you, Catherine. That was a beautiful piece. I am about to read from my piece, Space or Our Wonderful Insignificance, which is about the vastness of the universe and my understanding of my place in it. My brain cannot fathom how far away the stars really are. When I lie on my back, staring up at them, it feels like I should be able to reach out and touch them, like they're merely stuck to the ceiling, and if my arms were a little longer, I could brush the Milky Way with the tips of my fingers. I raise my arm perpendicular to my body and suddenly realize how small I am. The more I gaze at the stars, the more I register that the direction I'm reaching toward is only up in my frame of reference. In another, I am reaching down, held to the earth by an overall weak force we call gravity. If the earth did not have so much mass and I were not so close to it, my back is flush with the ground, my head and feet touch points with the grass, I might fall away, or really float away. I'm not near enough to anything else to move so quickly so as to require the verb fall. Even with the anchoring force from Earth's gravity, a part of me, somewhere in my gut and at the top of my head, floats like a balloon on the wind. My mind wanders to flying through space without the need for a spacesuit. I see so many incredible astronomical objects with my naked eye that I must be moving with improbable speed. Planets, stars, galaxies fly past, surrounding me with the majesty of the universe. As a kid, I had no idea how big the universe really was. I would imagine being an astronaut when I grew up, flying to the edge of the universe and reaching out to touch it. I thought the universe might be the shape of a room, and I would float to a bottom corner as far from everything else as I could possibly get. 20 years later, we haven't even seen the edge of the universe. The cosmic microwave background is in the way, a snapshot of the expansion just after the Big Bang, back when everything was hot and in motion and not quite formed. It's always there in radio static and black and white fuzz on old TVs. A quiet reminder of the edge of the known universe, if you know to listen for it. It looks like a tree, the leaves of which are shaking in the wind. The overall structure remains constant, but smaller sections are fluctuating, blurring together, splitting apart. Back in 1977, we launched a probe called Voyager 1. We flung it out, away from the sun, and it's still going, the farthest human-made object in the universe. 10 years ago, in 2012, it became the first human-made object to exit the solar system, and it kept going. It's starting to shut down now. It can't provide enough energy to keep all of its instruments going so far from the sun. It has done all the science it was meant to do and more. Its official mission ended in 1980, but it has been plugging along since then, keeping its instruments working as long as it could. Along with instruments for gathering data, it also carries information about us. On board is a golden record containing sounds from Earth, pictures of our life forms, greetings in more than 50 languages. It is one of the ways we are reaching out to the universe, searching for other life, desperate to know we are not alone. I wonder if I can feel the Earth spinning. My hands move to the cool ground beneath me. I know I am moving incredibly fast. The Earth is spinning and revolving around the sun, which in turn is revolving around the center of the Milky Way, which in turn is on a collision course with the Andromeda, and both are moving away from every other galaxy as the universe expands. I know all of this, but my body and everyone else's is so used to it that I may as well not be moving at all. I spin and fly through space, perfectly still, staring down at the stars, far too small to ever reach them. Thank you. And we will now have a 5-minute intermission So please take this time to grab a beverage of your choice, go to the bathroom, whatever you need, and we will start up again in 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you again for being here, and I hope you're back from your break. I am pleased to introduce the first of our second group of speakers, Caitlin Watkins.
Thank you, Sue. I'll be reading from a flash nonfiction essay called Waiting for June. We spend early spring walking the well-worn paths of our suburban neighborhood, eagerly, desperately greeting neighbors and dogs hungrily sniffing at the new grass. Evidence of deer and their springtime activities line the sidewalks along the woods. Mutilated sapling trunks and munched around clumps of shrubbery now shaped like phalluses. A mysterious trajectory of blood is splayed several yards along the sidewalk. A violent animal murder at first glance, but more likely the afterbirth of a hastily delivered fawn. My partner and I are taking in the colors, re-examining our old favorite houses and landscapes, discovering new ones that have emerged from a pandemic winter with facelifts and fresh coats of paint. This spring is different than before the lockdowns in so many ways. A year of channeling nervous energy into weeding, mulching, and experimenting with perennials is evident at nearly every address. So I started a Google Doc, my partner says, as we huff and puff up the slope of a hill that suddenly seemed much steeper than on previous walks. I added some links from Reddit and the transgender support groups I mentioned yesterday. My therapist is going to send us recommendations for someone who meets with couples. I feel lightheaded and stop to catch my breath at the crest of the hill, turning my back to the street. My gaze drifts to an especially meticulous bed of bulbs in bloom, carefully planned rows organized by flower height, like a church choir. Flashy red tulips harmonize with soft purple hyacinths. Bearded irises loom statuesque in the back row. The summer-loving pampas grasses, now brown and brittle, hover backstage as new thin tines of green cower at the base of each plant. I actually love this, I say to my partner, gesturing to the burgundy peony stems still camouflaged against the mulch, waiting for June. It's so well planned out. As soon as one row is done for the season, a new one is getting ready to bloom. I breathe in deeply and point to the long dead blades of the overwintered native grasses, beige shadows leaning over new growth. The ghost of last year's are showing us a preview, I say, a promise of beauty worth the wait. My breath has returned to my chest. My heartbeat no longer drowns out the birdsong in my ears. Thanks for putting that doc together, I say to my partner, reaching out a hand. It will be helpful when it's time to tell the kids. Thank you. And now, please welcome Amber Snyder.
Hello, everyone. I will be reading from my short story, Survivors. It was inspired by a woolly mammoth de-extinction project that we learned about in Communicating Climate Change last year. And where we begin in this story, a woolly mammoth calf has just been born, but her prognosis is grim. Theo, the main character, is starting to doubt her involvement in the de-extinction program. Ben pats Theo on the shoulder as Vishal wheels the calf out. We'll get there. Who knows how many mammoths we'll have in Siberia in 20 years? She twitches away. They have to survive first, she reminds him. He spreads his arms. I have the funds to keep trying for years. One will work eventually. She was so charmed by Ben and his ideas 5 years ago when she interviewed with his company as a fresh-faced college graduate. Colossus, the company with its bold idea to restore an extinct species and save the planet in the process. It was funded by investors as diverse as the Central Intelligence Agency and Elon Musk. 2 years into her 6-year contract, Theo began to realize that Colossus was more of a rich man's playground than a true scientific endeavor. Theo glances at a large photo of Ben by the door. taken at a press conference a few years back. She remembers it well. Security had to usher protesters out the door before Ben could begin. Colossus will introduce a new player in the fight against climate change, he crowed. The woolly mammoth will once again rule over Siberia, using its tusks to knock down trees and shrubs as it grazes, restoring ancient Arctic grasslands in the process, halting the melting of permafrost, and keeping methane and carbon in the soil. We have the technology, we have the funds. Here, a nod to the donors in the front row, and we have the ambition. And he nodded to Theo, who changed the PowerPoint slide behind him to show the woolly mammoth fetus in its artificial womb. Our work has already begun. The evidence of their failures lines the hallway display cases, in jars if they are small enough, taxidermied if not. Male calf, 400 days gestation, heart defect. Female calf, 200 days gestation, numerous deformities. Male calf, 100 days gestation, widespread chromosomal deletions. They never had a chance at survival or at saving the homeland that is beyond their help. The Siberian permafrost is melting into mud, tundra greening with shrubs and trees. Theo knows it will take far more than a few mammoths bowling over trees to halt the rising temperatures and restore a Pleistocene-era ecosystem. One more year, she reminds herself. Then she's running away from Ben and never looking back. Vishal emerges from the calf's room. Theo watches him type several notes on an iPad, perch his glasses on his forehead and massage his brow. He lifts his eyes and meets Theo's gaze. His look says all she needs to know, but he shakes his head. Theo eases down into the blankets beside the calf. She is hooked up to so many wires, quivering in confusion and pain. Theo strokes the soft head. Outside their lab, the world is drowning. This fool's errand, which once excited Theo, is nothing more than a distraction from a world that doesn't know how to stop its accelerating spiral toward disaster. Theo traces the cords up the wall to the outlet. The calf is panting now, her eyes unfocused. Her hand settles around the plug. She won't give Ben even one more day. Theo unplugs the cord. Thank you. And up next, we have Lucas Martin.
Hello. I'll be reading from my introduction to my thesis. So, the purpose of this work for me since the beginning was to continue learning about the war on drugs and its impact on the world. My first thesis 6 years ago at Bennington College discussed the federal drug scheduling system, or how the government categorizes and criminalizes certain drugs. I went on to work as a case manager for 2 years at a syringe exchange in the Skid Row area of downtown Los Angeles. I handed out bags of syringes and injection equipment to people living on the streets and trained people to use Narcan to reverse overdoses. More recently, I spent 2.5 years at a drug treatment center as a counselor. I saw the consequences on people's health as they detoxed from all kinds of drugs. I worked in an opioid treatment program with strict federal standards to give out medications like methadone for both inpatients and outpatients. I met with hundreds of people who had taken nearly any drug you can think of. I was in the position of connecting people to treatment to stop the pain of their withdrawals, or telling them they did not qualify and had to remain in pain without medication. When a person is in front of you for treatment, it's never just about the drugs. Addiction is not random. People have genetic predispositions for addiction, learned destructive family habits growing up, and experienced so much trauma, especially in childhood. So many people who use drugs and those who seek treatment were injured in car accidents and prescribed pain pills, but eventually transitioned to cheaper street drugs that work to cover their pain for a time. It's a fact of the history of this planet, larger than just our species, that drug use is indeed normal. Psychedelic mushrooms, vines, and cacti are prehistoric. Fruit fermenting into alcohol is a process as old as fruit. Beer, opium, peyote, ayahuasca, marijuana, these are ancient plants and plant-based brews passed down through generations specifically for their health benefits and psychological effects. Even recreational use of substances is a natural part of life worldwide, and it always has been. What's become natural in recent human history is to control these substances, control through law, trade, pharmacies, and prisons. In countries like China, Egypt, Iraq, Sri Lanka, and Thailand, people can still be executed if found with the wrong drugs. And even some US elected officials today are calling for similar penalties here. These systems are not meant to heal addiction, they are only meant to punish. Control over people's bodies is a profitable industry, and prisons remain the only place in this country where forced labor continues to be legal, largely fed by nonviolent drug offenders. It's important to remember that the modern war on drugs is only 50 years old. While slogans like tough on crime continue to work at corralling voters, this approach has already failed for decades at promoting public health or stopping drug use. It should surprise no one to hear that the drug war was started for racist reasons and continues to be racist in practice. Today, a disproportionate number of Black men have had their lives taken from them for drug crimes, and their families have suffered as their loved ones languish in cells. Even contact with family is a privilege that costs money, both in prisons and treatment centers. With both incarceration and addiction, we find the same approach: isolation. We now understand that addiction flourishes under isolation. People are better supported with connection and community. The science of addiction didn't always understand that. Before it was a sickness, addiction was just a character flaw. The original 12-step approach defined addiction as an allergy of the body. Then the medical community began to understand the physical effects of long-term drug use, withdrawals, and cravings. Now we call addiction a disease. None of these words or phrases really encapsulates what addiction does to the body and the brain and the family. While we know isolation does not heal addiction, we lack the infrastructure to support people who use drugs and those who want to stop. People struggling without housing are the hardest hit by the worst consequences of drug use, including overdose, infectious and chronic diseases, and being over-policed. Without a safe place to stay, we cannot expect people's lives to suddenly change and improve. Overall, we do not have an affordable healthcare system, and patients do not have access to all treatment options, especially when insurance companies set the standards. Addiction care is daunting, but we cannot stay stuck with a system that cares more for profit than for people. Connection and community is how we create a better and safer world. We need modern drug science to inform modern drug law. Above all, we need housing and a radical shift in how we care for people in need, because incarceration is not a replacement for healthcare. Thank you. And up next, we have Annabelle Moore.
Thank you, Lucas. That was so powerful. Today I'll be reading an introduction from my story, The Sleuths Searching for Montana's Lost Apples. A glossy apple with ombre shades of red, orange, and green bobs gently on its branch in a dry Montana breeze. This isn't an ordinary apple. It's an heirloom, a gift from prior generations of Montana farmers to those living in the region today. A gift that may help secure a more resilient food system. That is, if apple detectives can capture and preserve its genetic secrets before its gnarled elderly tree dies. Clustered behind an A-frame log cabin on the northwest shore of Flathead Lake lives the heritage orchard of Toby and Patrick Campanella, home to this extraordinary apple. For more than 3 generations, Toby Campanella's family has cared for 125 trees, first planted around 1898. Made up of varieties of Lodi, Dutchess and Oldenburg, and Wealthy, among others, the Campanella's legacy trees are over 75 years old, the minimum age to be considered a heritage apple. We've got trees that most people have never heard of, says Toby. Learning to care for their heritage trees has become an unexpected adventure in flavors for the retired university administrator. She describes some of her apples as fruity, like bananas, not in texture, but in taste. And just as her mother showed her, she crafts their fruit into juice, sauces, dried fruits, jams, and a killer pie. I've used the apples for the local kids' lunch programs, she says. The kids are always interested. I was surprised they noticed it wasn't a store-bought apple. The Campanella Orchard is one of over 70 cataloged in Montana State University's Montana Heritage Orchard Program, also known as MHOP. For the 58,000 Montanans who live over 10 miles from the nearest grocery store in so-called food deserts, accessible fresh fruit is stocked far out of reach. MHOP was founded in 2013 by researchers Brent Sarchett and Toby Day, who saw an opportunity to use Montana's rich fruit growing history to nourish current and future residents. The program's initial goal was twofold. First, to rediscover, document, and share the story of Montana's heritage trees. And second, to preserve the genetic diversity and resilience of heritage apples that thrive in the state's harsh and variable climate. Funded by a U.S. Department of Agriculture specialty crop block grant, the program helps landowners like the Campanellas identify lost apples and document their orchards' histories, and it offers guidance on how to care and propagate the trees. MHOP researchers hope that the apples used privately or commercially at farmers markets and cideries will boost agritourism in the rural economies. Heritage apples in Montana are rooted in its homestead history. In the mid-1800s, either unaware of or uninterested in native ecology, homesteaders and gold seekers sought a familiar source of sustenance and planted fruit orchards upon moving to Montana. During this time, one valley named the Bitterroot may have boasted between 10,000 and 15,000 acres of apples. But changing agricultural practices and farm boundaries have left many of these orchards abandoned. Luckily, heritage trees are hardy. They've survived decades of neglect, drought, disease, pests, and harsh winters, and they still produce apples. There's a genetic resilience in these apple trees that is worth saving. Thank you. I'm delighted to introduce Julia Grimmett, who will read from In the Deep, What Happens in the Brain During a Solo.
Awesome. Thank you, Annabelle. That was great. Okay. Under the hot yellow lights of the Lincoln Center in New York City, the dark, grumbly notes of a night in Tunisia emanated through the audience in a tide that ebbed and flowed. The trumpet crooned and the guitar hummed while the drummer drove the tune closer and closer. Michael Wang followed along with the sheet music, watching the blank bars of the solo section rapidly approach. Nerves clenched his stomach in an unforgiving vice that seemed to cinch tighter with each passing bar. Eventually, the time came. Wang stood up, abandoning his suit jacket on the chair behind him. He raised his golden King 3B trombone and blew. Wang deftly navigated his trombone slide back and forth as if dancing with the instrument. Notes tumbled out of his horn in seemingly random succession, both in conversation with the song and in daring opposition, demanding the attention of everyone in the performance hall. Wang's warm, brassy tone flirted with scales and intermingled with the rhythm section, never straying from the seductive Latin swing feel of the song. How did Wang make this daring switch from dutifully following the written composition laid out by the great Dizzy Gillespie to creating something totally new and unique? In the context of science, improvisation is a brand new field of study. The first creativity studies started popping up in the scientific literature in the 2000s, after the 1990 advent of the functional magnetic resonance imaging. fMRI transformed the field of neuroscience by allowing scientists to watch and record brain activity in new ways. Over the past few years, scientists have been working towards a fundamental understanding of what happens in the brain during improvisation, but more research is needed to understand the neuroscience of musical improvisation more thoroughly. Improvisation has always been an important aspect of musical expression, but jazz took it to the next level. In the 1920s, jazz traveled from the streets of New Orleans to bars and clubs across the United States. Musicians experimented with rhythm, notes, and chords, constantly riffing off each other. Artists like Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong, and Ella Fitzgerald brought jazz to the forefront of popular culture. The virtuosity of many famous jazz artists during this era continues to inspire musicians to this day. One of the very first studies to delve into the murky territory of improvisation was conducted by a team from the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, led by researcher Dr. Xiang Liu. The team observed brain activity of 12 rappers while they freestyled. It's important to note that the brain activity occurring during rap and jazz performances likely look a little different. In Liu's study, the language-centric areas of the participants' brains were activated, while the movement-centric brain areas were not. If you were to scan Michael Wang's brain during his solo at Lincoln Center, you might observe the opposite phenomenon. The parts of his brain responsible for movement almost certainly lit up as he expertly moved his trombone slide on stage. But because he wasn't using any words, his language-involved brain territory was likely neutral. However, both Wang and the rappers probably experienced similar activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region associated with complex cognitive behaviors, according to Liu's study. These results indicate that improvisation is guided by bottom-up neural processes, which essentially means that the brain allows information to flow through without much cognitive control. Instead of analyzing and judging every note, Wang's brain let the music flow out of his trombone unimpeded. Thank you. Up next is Ariel Hansen.
Hi. Sorry, I apologize. I'm doing this all on my phone, and so because I'm at an event. So I apologize for the delay. Hang on just a second here. And there we go. The piece that I'm reading is called A Fertile Death. The white-walled warehouse of return home. Oh, wait, am I actually reading? Am I actually allowed here? No, yes, I can't tell.
Ariel, you are reading. We are hearing you.
Okay, good. I'm sorry.
Right ahead.
Okay, there we go. The white-walled warehouse of return home reminds me of IKEA's self-serve area, cardboard on shelves rising high. Here, the racks are royal blue with orange junctions, supporting rectangular metal boxes the color of sand dollars and the size of a capsule hotel room. You could probably fit 4 on the floor of a single-car garage. This is where the bodies are. Return Home is one of 3 such facilities in Washington, the first state to approve natural organic reduction, or human composting. Compost can imply disposability, something dropped in a can at the curb. But gardeners know this is only a sliver of the cycle that nurtures life and reuses what's left after death. We can slow this cycle down, embalm a body, put it in a lacquered box, in a metal or concrete vault, and bury the whole shebang 6 feet under. And you can eke out a century or so in the right climate. Or speed it up. Put a body in a hot enough fire and you'll get a bucket of ashes in about an hour. Put it in a warm lye bath for near the same result in less than a day. But the truth is inescapable. Every corpse will eventually break down. Washington legalized human composting in 2019, and Oregon and Colorado have followed. 5 other states, including California, are considering it. The bills call for bodies to be treated with dignity and without mingling. We don't want strangers feeding grandma's roses, just grandma. And we want it to be safe for the living. Microbes, naturally occurring in our bodies while alive, break it down when we die. This releases heat, and when it gets hot enough for long enough, the breakdown dismantles pathogens, so laws are specific on heat and time limits. Ranchers have composted livestock flesh and bone for decades, often en masse when a disease outbreak necessitates slaughter. Return Home tapped this knowledge, bringing in a composting specialist to determine what to add to the beige boxes and when. Alfalfa, sawdust, straw, and air. That's it. They don't even stir or turn the mix for the first half of the process, which takes about 2 months from beginning to end. Halfway through, anything artificial is removed. Pacemakers, stents, pins, and fillings are kept for recycling, and the bones broken to hasten the microbes along. When it's complete, there's 300 pounds, give or take, of garden food. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, compost to compost. At the center of Return Home's conference table, next to a small potted plant, squats a pale trough the size of a sandwich loaf, nearly full of cocoa brown texture. A bit like dirt, a bit like mulch, with soft, crumbly fragments that look like a toppled tree trunk disintegrating, or perhaps pipe tobacco. The smell was subtly earthy, like the woods on a dry day. What was in the box, I suspected, recently used to say oink. That's Ziggy the Piggy, confirmed Bree Smith, the funeral director at Return Home. Pig carcasses are close stand-ins for human corpses, and the trough holds some of what's left of a test subject. Smith exudes a genuinely warm demeanor, like a much-loved elementary teacher who also happens to be excellent at embalming. And she's always been practical about death, instilled by a childhood of beet farming and ranching in Montana. She said, "You see animals come and go, crops come and go." Smith doesn't define herself as an environmentalist or conservationist, but many of Return Home's customers are. They see manicured cemeteries and shimmering smokestacks and want a greener way. Compared to modern burial and cremation, the environmental footprint of human composting is Barbie-sized, exceeded only by green burial. No transportation or coffin, a hole about 30 inches deep in the soil near where you die. Next best, and not much costlier than a standard funeral and burial, human composting also comes with an optional extra. Whether in burlap sacks for family members or scattered across 8 acres of scarred slope that Return Home will preserve in perpetuity as a memorial space, Smith said, "What we're giving back is very fertile, life-giving soil." And our final reader is Byron Ricks.
Thank you, Ariel. I'm going to read a piece called Worlding about the birth of awe. There once was a time when all species that Earth had ever known lived together in a single forest. That time was about 15 years ago, and it existed in our living room on the floorboards beneath a bank of windows with wavy old glass. It was a real world. I could see it. A pile of cedar fronds snipped from the big western reds out front and heaped on the floor. By any standards of housekeeping, and ours were low, this was a mess. But it was a mess only to adults. For our 6-year-old daughter, Julia, that mess was a place where anything was possible. She played there for hours. She called it worlding. On the hunter-gatherer continuum, Julia was a gatherer. She crept and crawled about the yard, collecting fistfuls of twigs, grass, and soft mosses, which she carried inside to examine. Within a year, Julia's brush pile became the centerpiece of our home. Over a few holidays and birthdays, she'd assembled mixed taxonomies of characters from toy store collections. Jungle Adventures was a 30-piece set that included 15 safari animals with a multi-story cliff and cave complex where they cohabitated. Mixed in were members from one of the many popular dinosaur combo packs listed in Amazon's catalog of things. With these characters, she created a schoolhouse open to all ages and backgrounds, from the Jurassic to the Holocene. They were simply the animals that existed in worlding, after all. When the incoming class of dinosaurs joined Jungle Adventures animals in the Cedars Forest, the inter-epoch dialogues began. It wasn't uncommon for a hippopotamus to greet a Cretaceous classmate with a high and a very sincere, "Parasaurolophus, how are you today?" They were about 75 million years apart, but still seemed to get along. It's not that Julia didn't have dolls, but the Anthropocene hadn't stepped into worlding yet. That changed one day when a neighbor brought over a shopping bag of clothes. Julia began peeling off strata of sweaters and shirts until beneath a pair of flowered leggings, there they were, a tangle of Barbies. Like weatherproofing against a storm, we tried to keep them out, only to have them enter in the Trojan horse of a Macy's bag. And so it was that Barbie took her place with the animals. Class resumed. Barbie, with her trademark tiptoe bipedal style, stood among Tiger and Stegosaurus as Brachiosaurus lectured. With a sustained smile, Barbie listened patiently as Parasaurolophus recited the alphabet. And the lessons continued as Julia's worlding expanded into the yard, where she bunched and tied tall grasses into huts. For a time, the dinosaurs lived there with worms, until one day when the asteroid of middle school hit and most of these toys were left idle and eventually packed away. But they had left an impression. As a young teenager, Julia was at home outside, smelling and tasting herbs in the garden, and could identify them blindfolded. She planted and harvested carrots and peas. Once she befriended a young chickadee fallen from its nest and carried it for an hour, perched on her finger. These experiences became as sustaining and necessary to Julia as food and sleep. Julia's worlding was a reminder that all life is still with us, among us. This summer, Julia will be worlding again. She's in college now, and her research focuses on identifying eggs as dinosaurs, turtles, and other animals that lived in Montana's Judith River Formation during the Cretaceous. Based on what she finds, she hopes to reconstruct the ecosystem that once existed for the dinosaurs. 2 winters before, she cataloged African lungfish fossils in the paleontology lab of the Burke Museum in Seattle. Among the shelves of specimens, she would slide open the thin trays and carefully lift the 200-million-year-old fragments and place them on a table. "Hello, Herodotus," I imagined her saying to the lungfish fossils. "How are you?" And then she'd open up the catalog and get to work. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Byron. That was a marvelous piece. And before we close out this evening, I'd like to first of all, remind everybody to check out thesciencewriter.org, and two of our readers this evening are featured in the recent issue. I'd also like to give a very special thank you to somebody special, to Sue Eisenfeld, who is a veteran faculty member who's taught many classes for this program since the start, and who's mentored and helped launch the writing careers of probably hundreds of students, and who's also shepherded the students we've just heard this evening through their complicated thesis semester. So huge thanks to you, Sue. And I do think I speak for Sue and for all the science writing faculty and program leaders in saying how immensely proud we are of you, thesis students. I and many faculty have read your work on the page, but hearing these pieces read out loud, I think, reveals whole new dimensions, and it's really a privilege and a joy to hear you read. You came to this program with talent, and you're leaving with talent and skills, and we're excited to see where you take those. So onward and good luck. And a thank you to everyone for joining us this evening for the fall thesis reading. And I wish you all a great evening.